He wasn't doing anything wrong, just a man seeking peace by the pool he worked his whole life to afford. No noise, no disturbance, no crime. Yet, what should have been a quiet afternoon turned into a nightmare. Two officers pulled up, their eyes filled with suspicion, their words dripping with authority. To them, he didn't belong. Not in that neighborhood, not by that pool, not even in his own skin. What started as a moment of calm suddenly became a test of dignity, a battle he never asked for. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know who they were dealing with, or how this story would end. Because this time, the tables were about to turn. On most days, Marcus lived a quiet life. He was a father, a hard worker, and someone who had finally earned the stability he dreamed of. His home, tucked in a suburban neighborhood, was his sanctuary, a place he had saved for years to afford. The backyard pool was his favorite spot, a symbol of how far he had come. To him, it wasn't just water and concrete, it was proof that perseverance meant something. That afternoon, the sun was heavy in the sky, the air humming with cicadas, and Marcus stretched out by the poolside. For once, life felt calm. No deadlines, no phone calls, just silence, and the comfort of knowing he had created a safe space for himself and his family. It was the kind of peace he rarely allowed himself to enjoy, but peace has a way of making itself unwelcome in stories like his. Beneath the stillness, there was an unease he couldn't quite name. A passing glance from a neighbor earlier, the car that slowed just a little too long outside his house. It was small, but it lingered in his mind. Marcus brushed it off, convincing himself that nothing was wrong. After all, why should there be? He was on his own property, harming no one. Still, he couldn't shake the faint prickle on the back of his neck, as though the world was watching, waiting. He didn't know it yet, but the peace of this afternoon was about to shatter. Because, sometimes, the most ordinary moments become the ones that reveal the harshest truths. Marcus leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, letting the warmth of the sun sink into his skin. It should have been just another afternoon, the kind that slipped by quietly. But then, faint at first, came the crunch of tires rolling up his driveway. His heart jumped, not in fear but in irritation. Maybe a delivery truck or someone lost. But when he opened his eyes, it wasn't a truck. It was a squad car. Two officers stepped out, their posture stiff, their hands already resting on their belts. They didn't knock. They didn't greet him. They just stood there, sizing him up as if his very existence needed explaining. "Can we help you?" Marcus asked in his mind, but he didn't say it aloud. Years of experience had taught him that tone mattered, expression mattered, even the way he breathed mattered. Every move could be twisted into something it wasn't. One officer pointed toward the pool. "Nice place you got here," his eyes said, but not with admiration, more like disbelief, as if Marcus sitting by his own pool was a crime. "Sir, we've had reports," the other officer finally said, his words sharp and clipped. "Reports?" Marcus's chest tightened. Reports of what? He hadn't seen a soul all afternoon. The questions started, fast and unrelenting. Whose house was this? Did he have identification? Was he supposed to be there? Each demand carried the same unspoken accusation. "You don't belong here." Marcus tried to steady his breathing, but inside, anger churned. He wanted to shout, "This is my home." But shouting wasn't safe. Anger wasn't safe. Even truth, in moments like these, wasn't always safe. Still, he stood his ground. "This is my property," he thought, the words caught in his throat. He walked carefully to the patio table, his wallet sitting right there. He held it up slowly, deliberately, every motion exaggerated so nothing could be misread. But the officers didn't relax. Their eyes narrowed, scanning his ID as though it were counterfeit, as though proof of ownership could never be enough. The minutes stretched on, every second heavy with suspicion. The silence between their questions was worse than the questions themselves. It was the silence of judgment, of disbelief, of waiting for him to slip, to stumble, to give them a reason. Marcus could feel the sting of humiliation. His neighbors had peeked out now, curtains shifting, blinds tilted. Some just watched, others lifted their phones. He wasn't a man at his pool anymore. He was a spectacle, a scene. And the officers? They thrived in that imbalance. They walked his yard as though inspecting it, pointing at his car, his fence, his mailbox. With every step, they stripped away his peace, piece by piece. But Marcus wasn't powerless. Not entirely. Because what they didn't know was that cameras lined his property, quietly recording every word, every gesture, every accusation. He stayed calm, though his chest burned. He let them dig themselves deeper, let their suspicion grow louder. And just when one officer placed a hand on his radio, ready to escalate, Marcus spoke, finally, clearly, and firmly. "This is my home." The words hung in the air, not shouted, but undeniable. The tension crackled, and for a split second, no one moved. The officers looked at each other, a silent exchange between them. They had expected fear. They had expected compliance. What they didn't expect was proof that the man they were trying to intimidate had been in control all along. And that proof? It was about to turn everything against them. The air grew heavier, every second pressing down on Marcus like a weight he couldn't escape. One officer's hand lingered near his holster, fingers twitching in a way Marcus couldn't ignore. The other circled behind him, cutting off any path of retreat. His pulse raced, not from guilt, but from the raw knowledge of what could happen if a single movement was misread. He had seen the stories, men just like him who didn't walk away. And now, standing in his own backyard, Marcus felt that same danger staring him down. Hands where we can see them. The words cracked like a whip, slicing through the still air. Marcus raised them slowly, the humiliation burning deeper than the fear. He wasn't a suspect. He wasn't trespassing. He was at home, and yet treated as if he were a criminal. The neighbors' phones were up now, cameras flashing, lenses fixed, on the scene. The officers didn't seem to care. In fact, their voices grew louder, their postures more aggressive. It was no longer about suspicion. It was about dominance. Marcus's heart pounded, every instinct screaming at him to fight back, to shout the truth. But he knew better. Survival meant restraint. Survival meant patience. And then, one officer reached for the cuffs. The click of metal sent a chill through Marcus's spine. They were really going to do it. Arrest a man for existing on his own property. But what they didn't know was that Marcus had already armed himself with the most powerful weapon of all: evidence. The cameras had been rolling from the moment they arrived. Every command, every accusation, every violation. It was all captured, waiting to be revealed. The cuffs hovered inches from his wrists, the world holding its breath. And in that moment, Marcus realized something profound. They thought they had stripped him of power, but in reality, they had given him the chance to expose them. The tables weren't just turning, They were about to collapse beneath the very officers who tried to control him. The moment the cuffs touched his skin, Marcus spoke, not in anger, but with steady conviction. "Check the cameras." His words froze the officers. Confusion flickered across their faces, followed quickly by unease. They turned, noticing for the first time the small, blinking lights on every corner of the yard. Their actions, their words, their aggression hadn't happened in the shadows. They had been exposed, recorded from the very start. The grip on his wrists loosened. The officers exchanged looks, their confidence unraveling. What began as an attempt to assert control had crumbled into something they couldn't erase. Evidence of their own misconduct. They left, but not with the authority they carried in. They left with the weight of knowing the truth was no longer theirs to bury. For Marcus, the scars were not physical, but they cut deep. The humiliation, the fear, the knowledge that even in his own sanctuary he was not safe, lingered. Yet there was power in survival, and even more in truth. His story was not just about injustice. It was about resilience, exposure, and the strength to stand when others would rather see him silenced. But here's the reality. Marcus's story is not unique. It is echoed in countless lives across neighborhoods, cities, and nations. Again and again, Black men and women are questioned, doubted, harassed, and worse, for nothing more than existing, in spaces they've earned, deserved, or simply belonged to all along. So the question isn't whether this one man turned the tables. The question is, how many more tables need to turn before the system itself does? When will safety no longer be a privilege, but a right? When will dignity no longer be questioned, but guaranteed? This was Marcus's story. But it could be anyone's. It could be tomorrow's headline. It could be your neighbor's truth. And the only way it changes is if we refuse to look away.